Welcome to CSI, Cooking Specialty Ingredients, the dessert. Hi, I'm Chef Heather Hurlbert. This educational video for the Hospitality Education Foundation of Georgia is supported by a generous grant made possible by the Georgia Department of Agriculture through the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service Specialty Crop Block Grant Program and funding from US Foods and Dexter Russell. In CSI, the dessert I'm going to be demonstrating using crops will be a seasonally delicious and unique dessert. I will be focusing on using fruits, vegetables, and herbs and using them to create a dessert that you can use for a competition or when creating a dessert menu. The terms, tools, and techniques that I use today, you can use too in a competition or when working in your kitchen. Now let's get started. I'll be creating a mint-scented white chocolate Greek yogurt mousse served with a caramel peach sauce, a ginger cookie crumble, coconut tuile, yucca croquette with fresh blueberries and peaches. Now I'm going to be creating the mint-scented white chocolate Greek yogurt mousse. This is a fail-proof way to melt chocolate in general. I have a pot of boiling water. I'm going to turn this off and I am going to put the white chocolate right on top. The residual heat will start melting the white chocolate. While this is melting, I'm going to be creating the mint-scented Greek yogurt. I like Greek yogurt for this recipe because it's very, very tangy in flavor, and also it has a little bit more body than regular yogurt. You can certainly use a 0%, which is what I have right here. So I have my Greek yogurt and my cream. In the recipes, there are 2 sets of cream. This is the smaller quantity of the cream, and I'm going to heat this together and we'll add the mint. So you can certainly use other herbs like Thai basil, chocolate basil, lemon thyme, tarragon. Mexican tarragon works really well. So you can add other herbs to it depending on what sort of fruits you're going to be accompanying it. We're just scenting this, just bringing out the flavor. You just want to be very careful of the quantity. I think people sometimes overuse it and it becomes very, very strong in flavor. In this recipe, because of the Greek yogurt and the white chocolate, which are very delicate in flavor, all you're wanting to do is just add a little flavor of mint and not overpower it. I know it comes in dried form. I've never used the dried form of mint. So all I'm doing is heating it. You don't want to bring this to a boil. Otherwise, you'll separate the Greek yogurt. Take this off the stove and let it steep with the mint. Next step is blooming the gelatin leaf. I have 1 sheet of silver gelatin leaf. I have a bowl of cold water. You're going to bloom. And blooming is basically you're absorbing moisture into the gelatin sheet. So we're going to let that just bloom in that cold water for a couple of minutes. I'm going to check on my white chocolate. See, it's already pretty much melted. White chocolate, it does burn very easily. It gets very lumpy and it will seize up. So it's very, very important that you melt it slowly and gently. Now you have it. I am going to extract the mint, the yogurt and the cream mixture. Mint is one of those herbs that you can use all year round. I love it in the winter. You can make mint candies. And then of course in the summertime when I make mint chocolate ice cream. So now add the gelatin sheet, and as you can see, it's now very flexible and it has the absorbed water. So I'm going to add that into the warm Greek yogurt and cream mixture. And by adding it into the warm mixture, it will melt the gelatin. When it's all melted, I'm going to pour it right into the white chocolate. It should come together nicely. So now you have this Greek yogurt, mint cream, white chocolate, and gelatin. And we're going to cool this down to about 75, 80 degrees. Cool to the touch. Whip the cream. You can certainly do this by hand. It's a little bit easier and faster if you use a mixer. I wanted to show you the texture and the consistency. You see how it drips? If it were a soft peak, you'd be able to see a peak, but it droops. And that's how you want it to be. And this is really considered chantilly cream. Combine the chocolate and the cream. I'm taking a little bit of the cream, actually mix it in. And by doing this, it keeps the chocolate from seizing up, and you end up with a very, very smooth mixture that you can add the rest of your whipped cream and it will fold very nicely. My cream is slightly runny, and that's how I like it. So now I'm folding, and the proper folding procedure, you should start from the center of the bowl, and you fold out while you're moving the bowl. And then just wipe the sides down. You never want to whip it or stir it because you're going to lose the air. Now you have your mixture and it's ready to be piped. I'm using the rings today, and what I've done is, because they're bottomless, I've just taken plastic wrap and just sealed them tightly. But in this case, you can use a flexi mold as well. Fill a pastry bag, no tip, cut the tip, and then start filling. Fill it almost all the way to the top, and just tap it down. And then take your offset spatula, just level it off. That way you get a nice clean top. White chocolate, because it has such a high quantity of sugar, it tends to be very, very sweet. By adding any sort of yogurt, it really cuts back on that sugar. There you go. There you have it. Mint-scented white chocolate Greek yogurt mousse. And it really freezes up very quickly. It sets up very quickly because of the chocolate with the addition of the gelatin. And then we're going to put this in the freezer until we're ready for service. Peaches are a stone fruit, also in the family with apricots and plums. Comes in two categories, clingstone and freestone. There are white or yellow, comes in many hybrid varieties as well as heirlooms. Georgia is a great place to be growing peaches since it has an intense summer heat. The caramel peach sauce. Take fresh peaches, you're going to score the top. I have a pot of boiling water. I'm going to add that in there. And depending on the ripeness and the variety, some take a little bit longer. And all you're doing is cooking it, just so the skin will peel off. So I'm going to check the peaches here. You'll notice that it's peeling right off. So I have a bowl of ice water just to cool it down. We're going to start peeling. You want to just peel. Sometimes it'll peel very easily. Sometimes you have to spend a little bit more time, but that's okay. And they have a really long harvesting. If you're doing a case of peaches, you just want to make sure you have some water with acid, like lemon. Otherwise it will oxidize, become brown. Now we have peeled peaches. I'm going to take off as much of the meat as possible. You don't want to waste. So I'm just going to go back and take off as much of the meat. So I'm taking all of that off. Now we're left with just the meat. Cut it into fairly consistent, doesn't have to be perfect. You're gonna be pureeing this. You just want it to have even cuts for even cooking. And this is a beautiful color. I'm gonna add it to my pot. I'm gonna add my brown sugar, and then I'm gonna start cooking it. You know, sometimes people think that they need to go by times. Oh, it's gonna take exactly 20 minutes. Of course, each fruit has its own character. So you just wanna make sure that you're always considerate of the ripeness, what type of fruit you're working with. This is turning out really beautiful. But the most important thing is with the purees is that you cook it and you make sure you bring it to a boil. And that will pasteurize it, and the sugar will act as a preservative. Once they're soft, do just a rough puree. And with peaches, I prefer it with a little bit of chunks. Makes it seem a little bit more rustic. It has a little bite to it because it is a sauce and it's going to have some blueberries in there. A little bit of chunks, it's a good thing. We have a vanilla bean. You're just going to split it in half, right down the center. Just take the blade and just scrape the center. If you're not going to use the pod, you want to add it into your sugar, and it's very, very aromatic, and also it's edible. So once it dries out, you can actually pulverize it with some powdered sugar, and you end up with this really intense powdered sugar mixture with vanilla bean. Once the sauce is made, you can take it out, rinse it out, dry it out, and then add it to your sugar. To make the caramel peach sauce, you always want to add the glucose first. Glucose is used so it doesn't crystallize the sugar. And then sugar. And you can go ahead and just add all of it. Make sure that you're watching it and stirring it constantly. You know, there's different kinds of vanilla beans. I really like the Tahitian vanilla bean. Tahitian is actually one of the most expensive vanilla beans. It's not as robust a bourbon or a Mexican bean because they're a little bit stronger. You can reuse it a couple of times. whereas the Tahitian bean is a little bit more delicate in flavor. So as you can see, it's starting to caramelize already. So when this caramelizes, we want it to come to a dark amber color. You'll start seeing it smoke, and that's a good indicator that you need to start the glazing. And this is wonderful with other fruits as well. You can add passion fruit puree, you could add blueberry puree, you could add apple puree. So you can also change out your orange juice. I actually like the combination of passion and peach. Those two flavors go really well together, so you could have certainly added passion fruit juice rather than orange juice. See, now it's starting to caramelize. When you're making this, you have to adjust the water. You may want to take a little bit more out, or you may need a little bit more. So if it seems like the sauce is too thick, you can go ahead and add a little water just to thin it out. Again, all these recipes, make it your own. Okay, now it's starting to smoke. Again, you wanted a dark amber color. Now I'm going to go ahead and add the puree. Just be very careful. Keep your face and your body parts away from the pot, the steam. Stir the puree very carefully. Make sure it's smooth and make sure it comes to a boil. Now we're going to go ahead, I'm going to add the vanilla bean. I'm going to deglaze again with the orange juice and water. And you just want to bring this to a boil. And this is where you can be very creative. You can add dried apricots, dried cranberries, and that'll just soak up all the juices. You can have a nice fall compote sauce. So I'm just waiting for this to come to a boil. Just want to make sure that you remove the vanilla pod, and then it should be done. I'll be creating the coconut tuile. Now you can certainly replace the coconut flakes with unsweetened coconut. It's essentially the same thing without the sugar. And also sometimes they call it coconut flour. And they tend to process unsweetened coconut a little bit finer than coconut flakes. In this recipe, I just use coconut flakes that you can buy at the grocery store. It's unsweetened coconut. You know, there's applications for both sweetened coconut and unsweetened coconut. In this recipe, it works really well with either one. Because the coconut flakes, they tend to be on the bigger side, what I did was I just put into a food processor the sugar and the coconut, and now it ends up being a lot finer. And it will also help when you go to spread it on a silpat if it's a finer crumb. You're adding all your dry ingredients together, the sugar and the coconut. My flour, combine it. And then I'm going to add my egg whites, combine that. And I have a pot of melted butter. We'll add that at the very end. I will add the butter and just stir it together. And there you have it. So I'm going to go ahead and put it into a container and put it in the cooler and let it cool down, and it's a little bit firmer to work with. My coconut tuile that I made earlier, it's been sitting in the refrigerator for about half an hour. So it's firmed up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and spread it on the silpat. And if you have a really nice stencil, like a square or a round stencil, you can certainly use that. But what I'm going to do is I'm just spreading just a little slab of it. And I'm going to break it up almost into shard shapes. It's looking a little abstract. So just make sure any holes are covered. And this is what I mean by making sure that you process your coconut really fine. It'll just make it easier to spread. And just also make sure it's spread evenly. Because of the high content of sugar, it will brown on the outside and will stay white on the inside. There's a couple tips in baking tuiles, and I'm just going to do a nice slow baking until it's evenly brown. And I'll put this in the oven. This is a yucca. It looks like a piece of bark. It's got this really hard, waxy skin. It can be eaten by steaming, boiling, frying. And when you go to fine yucca, peel it. It should be nice and firm. I really love the flavor of this because it's actually more delicate. It has almost a creamy consistency. Yucca croquettes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the ends. The skin is very thick and waxy. So I'm going to cut this into thirds. They pronounce it as yucca or cassava root. Peel away the sides. You can certainly use a peeler. It has a white meat, and as it cooks, it turns translucent. I've peeled off all the skin. The skin has cyanide in it. So what you want to do is after you peel the yucca, you want to rinse it off. So I have a bowl of water, and it's really used as a deterrent for animals so it won't be eaten. You just want to make sure you do rinse the yucca off. I'm just going to cut this. Flesh is quite firm, but it softens just like mashed potatoes. I've quartered it. I'm just going to let this soak in the water. It's just like cooking potatoes. You want to cook it in boiling water. I add a little bit of vanilla, or if you're making a savory application, you certainly want to add some salt to it. And it takes 20 to 25 minutes. You put a fork in or a knife in, and it should slide right off the knife. I have my yucca that's already been cooked, drained, and then you dry it. And the most important thing you must do before you start is right in the center, there's a very tough piece of fiber. So you must remove that. And sometimes it just peels right off. And you can see it, like this one right here. It's very leathery. So it's important that you remove that. I'm just gonna mash it up with a fork. You can certainly use a ricer. This is where you can add some salt and pepper, some olive oil or butter. And just eat it as. In this case, I'm making a croquette. And this is very similar to almost like a potato donut. And it comes together like a dough. I've mashed this up, so we're gonna add 1 egg. It's almost like making pasta, but you'll notice how it comes together as like a soft dough. So just work the egg. I'm gonna use one hand that's dirty, one hand that's clean. Because yucca has such a delicate flavor that I don't like to add too much to it, especially when you're adding it as another component to a dessert. Now, you don't necessarily need all of this flour. Again, it depends on how moist your yucca is. So I'm going to start with about half the flour and just work it. And if it seems like it's soft enough, then you don't have to use all the flour. So this is really wet, so I'm gonna use all the flour. It's just like making bread. You have to take other things into consideration, like temperature, humidity, and all the flour should be mixed in really well. This is delicious, drizzled with honey, just some simple powdered sugar, maple sugar. So as you can see, now you have this dough. We have the dough here, and I'm going to scoop them and roll them in some cornstarch. And the easiest way to do this, especially for proportion and consistency, I'm just going to use a number 100 scoop and scoop them out so that they're all uniform. Roll them in the cornstarch, almost like you're rolling truffles, just into a ball. By using this starch, it gives it a thin, crispy outer layer. You can certainly use an egg wash. You could dip it in some flour, egg, and then maybe even some panko if you want to get fancy. Carefully drop them in a pot of oil. It's at 350 degrees. And they're not really going to expand at all. There's no yeast, so it's not going to expand. So these are browning very quickly. This is a perfect size for dessert. We're going to prepare the ginger cookies. Ginger is a knobby underground stem. It's part of the turmeric and cardamom family. It has a lot of medicinal values. Cinnamon is a brown bark of the cinnamon tree, which is then dried, rolled into a tubular form known as a quill, or as cinnamon sticks. The hard brown seed from the nutmeg tree, a tropical evergreen, has a warm, spicy, sweet flavor. Instead of ground ginger, I'm using fresh ginger. I like to try to use fresh ginger as much as possible. Peel the skin off and use the flesh. However, don't throw out the peel. The peel actually has a lot of intense flavor, and you can use it for making like ginger teas. You can certainly use it in broths and stocks. You never want to waste the skin. So I've got the peeled ginger. I'm just going to mince this as finely as possible. You can certainly use a grater, but I just like a little hint of ginger in my cookie. And also, fresh ginger has a little bit of that spicy bite to it, which I absolutely love, that you can't get in ground ginger. And it's very, very aromatic. When you bake these cookies off, You're gonna smell that ginger right away. Just mincing this as finely as possible. You can take the side of the blade and crush it a little bit. Add the fresh ginger and then add your dry ingredients. We have pastry flour, oats. Not only is this cookie absolutely delicious, but it's good for you with the oatmeal, cinnamon and nutmeg. The brown sugar. I'm going to take my spatula and just combine the dry ingredients together. If you want, you can add other spices to this recipe. Combine my oil and water together. Just work it with your spatula, and I can already smell the ginger. It's amazing. This technique is the same technique you would use for making quick bread. Combine all your dry ingredients, you have all your wet, combine it together. I'm kneading it just to combine the dry particles and with the wet, just until it comes together like a dough. Anytime you're mixing with your hand, keep one hand clean, one hand dirty. I'm taking the dough immediately, putting it between two pieces of parchment. Rather than putting it in the cool and letting it chill, I'm just gonna flatten it out a little bit with my hands, and I'm gonna roll it out. By doing this, you don't use any flour. What I always see is people use a lot of flour, and it's additional flour that is not in the recipe. And I flip it over. So I'm going to roll this out to the thickness that I want, and I would say probably about 1/8 of an inch. And you can certainly do this with all sorts of doughs. It's just a nice little trick, and it's quick and easy and clean. And all you do is you put this in the freezer, let it set up. I have pulled out my ginger cookie dough out of the freezer. You can take a round cutter and cut out the size of the base of your mousse. In this case, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm just going to cut it into pieces. Make sure that all your pieces are the same size so it bakes evenly, just like that. Take pieces of dough, place it on either a silpat or a piece of parchment. And as you can see, they're all even size, so even baking and even color. And then we're going to bake this off about 340 degrees for about 15 minutes until it actually starts to color. And what you can do with this piece of dough is you can actually gather it, re-roll it, and put it back in the freezer, and it'll keep well in the freezer for months. Now we're ready to plate up the dessert. You want to always wear gloves when you're working with finished products. All right, so we have, this is the mint-scented white chocolate Greek yogurt mousse with our peach caramel sauce, and it's the perfect consistency. Some blueberries as a garnish. The coconut tuile has been baked, and I broke it up into shards, and you can just place it randomly. And then you have your croquettes, and I would only do one, or even two is fine. The ginger crumble, and I just put it right on the bottom. And again, that adds another texture. Generously dust with powdered sugar. Voila! And there you have the mint-scented white chocolate Greek yogurt mousse with ginger cookie crumble. We have a coconut tuile, yucca croquettes with a peach caramel sauce. Thank you for joining us on CSI.
Cooking specialty ingredients.
See you next time.
That was good.